ask you a bit about family in this story. It's sort of bittersweet as we're coming toward the end of this series when we've spent a lot of time with each of the characters, and I found that the family relationships in this book really kind of deepen the emotions of the whole story. And there's this central conflict in the story that you have referred to between Caroline and Lord Preston, her father. Is trying to protect her from this marriage that he thinks is going to make her unhappy. And we were talking as you were writing this book, and I know you were kind of struggling with writing Lord Preston because you've already established him as this, very loving and thoughtful and caring person. And so this book was kind of felt like a departure in a way. So can you talk about how it felt to write him as sort of the villain in the story?
Well, I knew all along, since before I started writing the series, that he was going to have this moment because part of it is what does it mean to live a progressive life? And I think from generation to generation, we have different ideas because we grow because of what the previous generation did. So I knew this was going to be a confrontation of him with his principles versus his children's principles. However, I was really nervous. I guess I am still a little nervous that readers won't be along for that ride. Since I've always known that, I have planted a few seeds throughout the series, but I also was like, don't show your hand. So mostly he has been this character who is a very understanding, liberal minded, welcoming, loving father. I do think if you go back, specifically in Viscount Without Virtue, there are some moments where he's failing. And I'm going to explore that more, hopefully, in the next book. But yeah, I feel that in this book, we're not in his head. We are only in Caroline's head and Eddie's head. And so the conflict between Caroline and her father, we can only experience as she experiences it, and with her bewilderment and her surprise at this turn of who her father is. I think I really wanted to explore that because the whole series is about trying to live progressively and being aware of your privileges, and you're never going to know all of your privileges, and you're never going to have perfect empathy, and you're never going to always respond correctly. And so I really wanted to have that on the page.
Yeah, and I mean, he's sort of right in some ways that, Caroline, she is going to struggle with the life that she could have with Eddie. And I like that it wasn't like a super cut and dry, like, the parent is wrong and the child knows
Right.
this.
Well, it was interesting because in The Baron Without Blame, which establishes the whole series, Lord Preston and Caroline's mother get married against her father's will. And
Hmm.
so then that comes back in this book, that there are a fair number of like little moments that echo specifically The Baron Without Blame. And yeah, I think as opposed to The Baron Without Blame, where that father is just like this villain, Lord Preston, I never wanted to be a complete villain, and he's not, but he also is taking up the role of the traditional villain in a romance novel of standing between them.
Yeah.
And you're right, he is right in many ways. There's a traditional arc of the romance genre where the couple is refusing to be together and everyone's like, just be together. And they're refusing to be together for reasons. And then, like, by the end, they're together. I feel like I got 75% through of writing this and I was like, oh, I see what I did. I know why this is so hard, because actually, this is the reverse of that. Everyone's
Mm.
saying you shouldn't be together. And the couple's
Uh-huh.
like, we should totally be together. But it's actually like, no, like maybe you shouldn't be together. So
That's
then I
funny.
just hope that I was convincing in the end that they should.
You can pull it off.
Thank you.
That's funny. I recently became a parent, so I was particularly interested in the parenting choices in this book. You have Lord Preston on one hand, kind of trying to protect Caroline in one way, but then you also have the Chows trying to protect Eddie in a different way, and they both kind of mess up. And I don't know. Obviously, my kid is still a baby, but it made me sort of think about how we try to control people's lives, the people we love, in order to stop them from getting hurt, and how we can't really do that. So felt like a
Yeah.
true portrait of parenthood.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, the Chows are interesting going back to power because they have power over Eddie, but they don't have as much power as he perceives them to have,
Mm.
and their choices are constrained.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, kind of on that note, I know you've talked about like family love versus romantic love before on this podcast, but it was really striking in this book that it's, it's not just Eddie and Caroline's central love story, but it's also their relationship with their parents and their siblings and like the relationship of these two families that have lived side by side for so many years. And there's also an animal love story in this book.
Yeah.
Eddie has a pet dog, Linny, and she's kind of like an object of affection and jealousy. So can you talk about the different kinds of love in this book and where your thoughts were as you were writing these different relationships?
Yeah, I'll start with the dog because that's easiest. I wanted to challenge myself and have an animal as a supporting character because that's something that a lot of romance novels do, and I hadn't done. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And I think it turned out to be very useful. The challenge with adding any relationship other than the romance relationship is it still needs a satisfying arc, but
Mm-hmm.
it cannot detract from the romance and it can't take up more space than the
Mm-hmm.
romance. So every time I add something else in, it's like, okay, but what about the romance? So yeah, Linny, the dog, got tied in to the
Mm-hmm.
romance and was instrumental to some parts of it. Writing the family relationships, obviously, I knew that that was going to be really important to this story. I wanted to get the siblings in as much as possible because they are also part of the equation and we know them and love them. Both the Preston siblings and also the Chow siblings, we've gotten to
Yeah.
know through the Northfield Hall novellas. Yeah, so I think it was really important to know how Caroline and Eddie would each turn to their siblings and what they might expect, and then how they might be surprised or disappointed by their siblings. A question that I had as I was writing it is how important is it to Caroline and Eddie ultimately to have the support of their family in order to be happy? Like, if all the siblings were like, yeah, no, this is a bad idea. And if they were completely disowned, would they really be able to be happy? Just the
Mm-hmm.
two of them in some cottage in a valley somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's a question they have to reckon with.